The morning began peacefully at the Sanchez house, but like many other mornings, Solange noticed a growing tension as she sat at the kitchen table, flipping through newspapers in search of inspiration for the design of her future home. She observed her father, Emmanuel, hurriedly getting dressed. "Another interview today, Dad?" Solange asked, trying to mask the skepticism in her voice. Emmanuel adjusted his tie in the window's reflection and offered a smile meant to be reassuring. "Yes, my dear, a promising engineering firm," he replied with optimism in his voice, but his eyes avoided meeting hers. Solange bit her lower lip, concerned. In recent months, Emmanuel's supposed job interviews had become more frequent, but they never resulted in a job offer. Moreover, he was leaving the house in attire that seemed too elegant for typical interviews. "Dad, are you sure?" she began hesitantly. "Solange, I know you're worried, but today I feel it will be different," Emmanuel interrupted, moving closer and placing a kiss on her forehead. "Don't worry so much," he said, grabbing his briefcase and heading out the door. Solange went to the window, watching as he got into the car and drove away. The young woman sighed, feeling a mixture of hope and doubt. Things just weren't adding up. His prolonged absences, the late-night dinners, the hushed phone calls when he thought no one was listening. Solange had noticed it all. Determined, she set aside the newspapers and opened her laptop. It was time to dig a little deeper into these so-called interviews. With a quick search, she tried to find information about the company her father had mentioned, but there were no recent records or interview announcements from this company. Solange's heart raced as her suspicions grew. She needed answers, not just for herself, but for her mother, who seemed increasingly concerned about their finances and Emmanuel's strange routine. Solange knew she would have to confront her father, but first she needed solid evidence. The puzzle pieces needed to be assembled, and Solange was determined to uncover every secret hidden behind her father's excuses. On a chilly autumn evening, Solange decided to take a walk to clear her mind, which was burdened with growing doubts about her father's activities. Her path inadvertently led her to the most upscale part of the city, where a new luxury restaurant had recently opened. Curious, she approached to observe the scene when something unexpected caught her eye. Through the large glass windows of the restaurant, Solange saw Emmanuel. He wasn't with colleagues as one might expect, but with an elegant woman whose demeanor and attire radiated sophistication and success. Upset and confused, Solange hid behind a nearby column, watching the scene unfold. The place was bathed in soft lighting, and the ambient music only seemed to heighten the tension she felt. "This can't be," she murmured to herself, pulling her phone from her purse. Emmanuel and the woman were laughing together, clinking wine glasses, clearly enjoying each other's company in a setting that was far from a business meeting. With trembling hands, Solange positioned her phone and snapped a picture. Capturing the moment with perfect clarity, she felt her heart grow heavy. The evidence was there, vivid and undeniable. Immediately, Solange backed away slowly, each step feeling like she was distancing herself from a life she had always thought was stable and secure. She returned home, the image of betrayal imprinted on both her mind and her phone. Back in her room, Solange looked at the photo repeatedly, each viewing deepening her understanding of the situation. Before confronting her father, she knew her next steps had to be carefully planned, as what was at stake was not just the relationship between father and daughter, but the entire foundation of their family. "Who is she?" Solange asked herself, resolute. The night had brought a dark revelation, but it was just the beginning of her quest for the truth. After the painful discovery at the restaurant, Solange knew she had to proceed with caution and precision. In her dimly lit room, reflecting her growing anxiety, she opened her laptop and accessed a facial recognition software she had used before for a university project. Taking a deep breath, she uploaded the photo taken at the restaurant and awaited the results. Within seconds, the unknown woman's face was identified. Solange stared at the screen, her heart racing as the information appeared. Silvana Lopez, 38 years old, a renowned architect with numerous national and international awards. The revelation left Solange feeling even more confused and betrayed. Why would her father, a simple unemployed accountant, be dining with such a successful architect? "Who are you, Silvana Lopez?" Solange whispered, as she began a more detailed search into Silvana's life and career. Browsing through articles, online portfolios and interviews, Solange learned that Silvana was a prominent figure in the architecture world, known for her innovative and sustainable projects. She had led grand skyscraper projects in major capitals, luxurious residences, and she was frequently featured in design and architecture magazines. Each click brought more admiration for her work, but also deepened the mystery of her connection with Emmanuel. The screen displayed an interview with Silvana, and Solange turned up the volume to hear her voice. Architecture is more than just building spaces. It's about shaping the environment where people will live their lives. It's a significant responsibility and a privilege. Silvana's voice was strong, conveying a palpable passion for her profession. Solange leaned back in her chair, absorbing her words, trying to find any clue in Silvana that would explain her meeting with Emmanuel. She made notes on various aspects of Silvana's work style, public appearances, and began to form a plan. She knew she needed more information, and perhaps Silvana herself, unknowingly, could provide it. "I'm going to dig into this for myself and for my mother," Solange said with determination, closing her laptop. The investigation was just beginning, but Solange felt she was on the right path to uncovering the secrets her father was hiding. Solange spent the morning preparing the dining room, paying meticulous attention to every detail, positioning each utensil and glass with precise care. Nervous energy pulsed with every move, but she was determined to see her plan through. Paulo, her fiancé. He noticed her tension and approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her and kissing her neck. "Everything looks perfect, Sul. Try to relax. It's all going to be fine," he whispered, attempting to soothe her. Solange forced a smile, but her eyes remained troubled. She had invited her parents and Silvana for a lunch under the guise of discussing the plans for the future house she and Paulo were building. The real reason, however, was to expose her father Emmanuel's lies. "I just want everything to be resolved today," she said, adjusting one last flower in the center of the table. As the guests began to arrive, Solange's anxiety grew. Her parents were the first to arrive, with Emmanuel appearing particularly eager to talk about the house plans. Her mother, Telma, noticed the tense atmosphere and cast a questioning glance at her daughter, who merely shrugged. "Well, everyone is here, so let's begin," Paulo said, trying to lighten the mood as he guided everyone to the table. Just as everyone was settling in, the doorbell rang. Solange stood up to answer it, her heart pounding so loudly she could almost hear it. She opened the door to reveal Silvana, as elegant as ever, in a well-tailored suit. "Silvana, what a pleasure to have you here. Please come in," Solange said with a smile that concealed her true feelings. Silvana stepped inside, looking around, slightly puzzled by the invitation but still smiling. "Thank you, Solange. It's a pleasure to be here," Silvana responded. "You have a lovely home," Silvana complimented as she followed Solange to the dining room. Upon entering the room, Silvana immediately recognized Emmanuel, who visibly paled at the sight of her. Paulo and Telma exchanged glances, trying to understand the sudden tension among the three. "Emmanuel, do you know Silvana?" Solange asked, her voice calm, but her gaze firm as everyone took their seats. The tense silence hung over the table like a dark cloud. Emmanuel stammered, searching for words as all eyes turned toward him. Silvana, sensing the awkward situation, looked from Emmanuel to Solange. We met at a conference," Emmanuel finally managed to say, his voice barely more than a whisper. "A conference, Dad? How interesting," Solange continued, her gaze fixed on Emmanuel, not letting him off the hook. The lunch was served, but no one seemed to have much appetite. The truth was on the table, and Solange was ready to address it directly. The atmosphere was tense, with everyone at the table exchanging cautious glances as the first courses were served. Solange, however, had little interest in the food. Her focus was entirely on the unfolding events she had meticulously planned. As soon as Silvana sat down, she looked notably uncomfortable with Emmanuel's presence, who could barely mask his agitation. Feeling a surge of nervousness, Solange decided it was time to address the issue. "Before we discuss the plans for the house, I'd like to clarify an important matter," Solange said firmly. She then took her phone from her purse and projected a photo onto the TV screen through a wireless connection. The image displayed Emmanuel and Silvana together at the restaurant, clearly engaged in an intimate and cheerful conversation. "Dad, can you explain what's happening here?" Solange asked, her gaze fixed on Emmanuel with a serious expression. Emmanuel swallowed hard, his face paling as everyone at the table turned their eyes to the screen. Silvana, taken by surprise, looked from the photo to Emmanuel, her expression shifting from confusion to shock and hurt. "Emmanuel, you said this was a business meeting," Silvana began, her voice trembling slightly. "That was a lie," Emmanuel tried to reply, but his words seemed inadequate. He glanced at Telma, his wife, whose eyes were now filled with tears and disillusionment. "Emmanuel, how could you?" Telma said softly, the pain evident in her voice. "I can explain. It's not what it seems," Emmanuel finally managed to say, but his defense sounded weak and empty. "It's not what it seems," Solange interrupted, her patience clearly exhausted. "You're on a date with another woman while telling your family. How could this be interpreted any other way?" Solange asked, her frustration evident. Silvana, still in shock, turned to Emmanuel, waiting for an explanation. When it became clear that no satisfactory explanation would come, she turned to Solange and Telma. "I truly didn't know he was lying about his situation." "I'm very sorry for being involved in this," Silvana said, her voice sincere and her expression, despite her own hurt, showing empathy for the two women before her. Emmanuel hung his head in defeat as Telma, with tears in her eyes, stood up from the table, unable to endure any more of the situation. Solange gave Silvana a silent nod of thanks for her honesty before redirecting her attention to Emmanuel, ready to address the consequences of his actions. The revealing lunch had turned into a scene of sadness and confrontation. Telma, the betrayed wife, looked at Emmanuel with a mix of disbelief and pain. The revelations of the affair and Emmanuel's weak excuses had eroded the last remnants of trust she had in her husband. The atmosphere in the room was heavy with emotion, and the silence was punctuated only by Telma's muffled sobs. Finally, with a trembling but clear voice, Telma confronted Emmanuel. "With us, Emmanuel, with your family?" she asked, her words laden with bitterness. Emmanuel, pale and visibly shaken, reached for her hands, seeking any sign of forgiveness. "Telma, I made a terrible mistake. Please give me a chance to—" Telma pulled her hands away from his, cutting him off with a resolve that even surprised herself. "No, Emmanuel. Years of lies, excuses. I can't live like this anymore. I can't trust you anymore." Emmanuel tried to argue, his voice cracking with emotion. "I love you, Telma. It was a mistake. I never meant to—" "Love doesn't destroy, Emmanuel," Telma interrupted, her voice rising with a mix of anger and sadness. "Love doesn't lie, doesn't betray. You've destroyed our family. You've ruined everything we built together." Solange and Paolo stood by, motionless, witnessing the painful unraveling of a marriage. Solange moved closer to her mother, draping an arm around her shoulders in a gesture of support. Telma took a deep breath, her next words coming out with icy clarity. "I want you to leave the house, Emmanuel. Today, I need space to think and heal without you here." Emmanuel looked around, the reality of his actions finally sinking in. Speechless, he shook his head as tears began to well up in his eyes, acknowledging the irreparable damage his actions had caused. "I will. I'll pack my things," Emmanuel murmured, his voice barely audible, before rising unsteadily and making his way to the bedroom. Each step seemed to carry the weight of his choices. As Emmanuel left, Telma allowed herself to cry openly, supported by her daughter and future son-in-law. The bond of their shared life had been shattered. While Emmanuel packed, with Solange's support, Telma began to consider the first steps of a new journey, one that would be built on respect and truth, free from the shadows of betrayal. Following the tumultuous revelation and Emmanuel's subsequent departure, the atmosphere in Solange's home was somber and heavy. The days that followed were challenging as Solange and Telma adjusted to their new reality. During this period of uncertainty, Silvana, the architect inadvertently caught up in the scandal, decided to take proactive measures. Regretful for her unintentional role in the family drama, Silvana arranged a meeting with Solange and Paolo at the house that Solange intended to build. She offered to design their new home free of charge as a gesture of apology and support. Solange, deeply moved by the generous offer, accepted, and Paolo also expressed gratitude. Together, they began planning the construction, with Silvana contributing innovative and sustainable ideas. As the building progressed, the project became a symbol of new beginnings and the possibility of renewal. The house began to take shape, each decision reflecting the hope of a fresh start. During this time, Solange invited her mother, Telma, who was facing difficult moments, to live with them, an offer Telma accepted with deep emotion. As Solange's family found healing and renewal, Emmanuel, feeling isolated and contemplative, decided to make changes in his life. He took concrete steps to rebuild his life and relationships by attending counseling and seeking employment honestly. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Your support is incredibly important to us.